Are we facing the same enemies ultimately?
It's the same coalition, I would say. The coalition of evil, which is Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, with their proxies and allies.
Okay, so thank you for joining us. Tell us, Amir, Ukraine and Israel are both at war. Are we facing the same enemies ultimately?
It's not exactly the same enemies. But it's the same coalition, I would say. In other words, we have on one hand the coalition of evil, which is Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, with their proxies and allies. So next to Ukraine, of course, you have Belarus, and you have the Hezbollah, the Houthis, Hamas, uh, the Shiite militias in Iraq, etc. So that's one coalition. On the other side, you have the civilized world, and I think what's important both in Ukraine and in Israel is that the civilized world wins against the evil coalition, which wants to bring the world back to a dark ages of dictatorship, violence, and barbarism, really.
So tell me, last year you had quite a passionate interview with RT where you promised that Russia would pay for everything it's doing, including to Israel. Does that still hold?
I think so. I have to say that it is lasting longer than I expected, and no end is in sight. But yes, I think that first of all, Israel cannot. I mean, Israel needs to finish our own business here. But I think that afterwards, whenever it happens, and the truth is, I don't know when it's going to finish, but when it will finish eventually, um, Israel will have to find a way to work out some sort of solution to make Russia pay because it is not possible to accept. And again, it doesn't really matter who is in power in Israel, but it is not possible to accept a situation whereby you have a terrorist group like Hamas, which is essentially doing a genocide, because this is what the 7th of October was about. It's committing genocide. It's a wholesale massacre of civilians because they are Jews for no other reasons. So we cannot tolerate this. I think we have shown that over the past year. But the next step afterwards will be to say to everybody who's been an enabler, an ally to these genocidal maniacs, that they are going to have to pay a price. So I don't know exactly what this is going to look like and how and when, but yes, I think that they're going to have to learn, all these people, the hard way, the way the people from Gaza and the people now in Lebanon are learning, and the people in Iran and elsewhere, and we saw also in Yemen, they're learning it's not a good idea to start on Israel, to pick up a fight, and they will all learn. They will all learn that they're going to get, I would say, an education uh, seminar, uh, in one way or another, through tanks, if it needs be, or through other means. But they will learn. They will learn that it is not a good idea to be an ally of genocide or murderers.
But does that include helping Ukraine?
Yes, I think so. I think that, by the way, my understanding is that it's not that Israel is not doing anything. I think we're not doing all what we should be doing and what we could be doing, but I don't think we're not doing anything. But again, we are at war, and it's complicated to open a new front now. And Israel has an interest at this point to not increase the fire on all fronts. As you can see, we're segmenting these wars. We didn't go on a full, on a full war against Lebanon until we felt that in Gaza the situation was under control. And even now, we're not yet at full power against Lebanon because essentially we need to get rid of the the bunkers and all the Hezbollah infrastructures on the border, and only then there's going to be a possibility to widen the conflict within Lebanon. And we have not yet answered properly against Iran, but all these things are going to happen. All this, it just takes time and it's long and complicated. So regarding Ukraine, it depends when the war ends between Ukraine and Russia. If the war ends over the next few weeks or months, it's going to be difficult. But if Ukraine manages to hold its ground, and it's the responsibility of the Western countries, first of all, okay, to make sure that Ukraine has got the resources to hold. Then at some point, Israel will do something to help Ukraine against Russia. I have no doubt about this.
Such as, perhaps you could give us an
I don't know. I'm not. I don't have specific informations, but whether it's I don't know, maybe intelligence sharing, maybe giving some weapons. By the way, we captured a lot of weapons from the Hamas and the Hezbollah, which are often Russian weapons and Chinese weapons and Iranian weapons. Israel, I don't know how much of a use we have for these weapons. I think it could be a good idea to ship at least some of them to Ukraine. I think this is probably something we could do soon. But beyond that, again, I'm not in this military system, so I can't give you an answer which is serious. But there are ways, and I think we will work out ways to help Ukraine when times comes, from our point of view. But this is necessary for two reasons. The first reason is because we have to punish Russia. As I said, this is not something that has to do with Ukraine. It's something which has to do with us. Russia needs to be punished, finished. And on top of it, we need to show Putin and his regime that aggression bears a price. And I think that's a collective responsibility of the West to help Ukraine, and Israel, as part of the West, has to help Ukraine.
Tell me, Israel often rejects Western recommendations, right? How come you're so good at it?
Unfortunately, we've got a lot of experience, and the Western world, and I say that with a lot of sadness and angst and concern. The Western world is very, very weak, very weak. The Western world, probably because of the trauma of this First and Second World War and the terrible bloodshed that has been going on in Europe for decades before 1945. I think Europe is is not ready anymore to fight. People don't want to fight, which I understand. I appreciate that, right? Who wants to fight? But the problem is that they want to essentially buy short-term quiet at the expense of long-term peace and stability. And they say, oh, let's stop the war at any cost, essentially. But it's not the right attitude. Because when you are dealing with regimes like Putin, when you were dealing before the war, for instance, with regimes like Hitler, right? Nazi Germany and fascist Italy and Japan, etc. These regimes need to be deterred. And being weak is really it's an invitation to these regimes to be aggressive. You need to be strong, and being strong doesn't only mean having a strong and large army. It also means that, but it means being willing to use it. It means being ready to kill and be killed. And the West is not ready anymore. They don't want to even kill their enemies. I mean, this is not normal. I mean, I understand we don't want to kill people, right? Ideally, we would want our enemies to stop being our enemies and we'd all be friends. It would be wonderful, right? But it's not always possible. So you have to be willing to, you have to have the means to protect yourself and project power so that you can deter bad actors and rogue states like Russia. But beyond that, you need to be willing to use these resources, including causing massive casualties to the enemy and having to suffer casualties on your own. There may be no choice. And if you're willing to do that, then often there's not going to be a need to use them because the other party is going to be deterred, right? So that's what Ronald Reagan, the US president, said 40 years ago, peace through strength, right? This is how you keep peace. You are extremely, extremely strong and you're willing to use your strengths. Now, as far as to answer your question, we on our side in Israel have no choice because, since the Second World War, essentially, thank God, Western Europe has been at peace, and the Western world mostly has been at peace. Most of the wars that have happened have been, I would say, wars waged abroad, not on the European continent, with the exception of course, the Yugoslav civil war. But even then, it wasn't far away geographically speaking, but it was not fought on the soil of Western countries, right? And so people have lost the consciousness of the need to fight, and they want to avoid fighting at any cost. And unfortunately, the price that we pay for this attitude is renewed aggressivity from Russia, from China. We see that China is being very aggressive towards Taiwan, and it's very, very worrying. And the Western world needs to understand that we are now dealing with a situation which we have not known over the past generation, even maybe more than that, where we have leaders in foreign countries who are aggressive and determined to reach their goals by force. And there is no other way, this being the situation, than the need to deter them, which means we need to rebuild. I say we, I mean the West, we need to rebuild our entire armies everywhere and make them very strong. And we have the technology to make them much stronger than Russia. There's no discussion about this. The Russian army is very, very weak and not so relevant if we have enough resources, if we're willing to throw resources against it. So that's on one hand, but we need to be ready to use them. And so we in Israel have no choice. We have no choice because if we listen to the Westerners, we're going to die.
The West often floats this idea of Israeli security model for Ukraine. And would you yourself recommend it to us?
Yes, yes. First of all, I want to say to Ukraine, in hindsight, it's too late now, of course, but it should have been adopted many years ago, certainly after 2014. There is no alternative to universal conscription. Having an army where everybody goes to the army for 2-3 years, the entire country essentially. This is not something I like personally. I prefer in principle to not have an army and to not have to have an army. Certainly not to have a conscription army. I would prefer to have professional armies like the West has everywhere, almost all Western countries. But this is not realistic when you are unfortunately facing an enemy such as Russia. So everybody needs to go to the army, spend a long time, like in Israel, 3 years, and spend a lot of money on your defense and increase technological edge, whether by creating your own technologies or by buying other technologies and then duplicating them, replicating them, right? And creating a large domestic military, industrial and military industries, right? So there's no alternative to that. And I think that also in terms of attitude, Ukraine needs to be, of course, very careful with its soldiers because Ukraine has suffered tremendous losses. And we cannot be, of course, complacent about this. But beyond this, Ukraine needs to find creative ways. I think like Israel are, we've seen that with the beeper, right? Israelis are very, very creative and think out of the box. I think it's time. I mean, I think the Ukrainians try to do that, but I think it's time for Ukraine to understand that we may have no choice because the West is so pathetically weak, but to essentially, take the Western countries with us, if you want, uh, um, bring into a direction that we want, even if that's not what they wanted to begin with. But I think, for instance, this invasion of a part of Russia was a good idea. And I think that you have to find other creative ways of hurting the Russians and creating victories, because victory is what drive a motivation. Ukraine needs to win. So find ways to hurt the Russians and to create local wins and increase the motivation, both of the Ukrainians and the Europeans and the Westerners, that they see that it's not, that the investment is not going down the drain. So that's I think there are all kind of ways. I'm sure that Ukrainian army has got ideas, but try to think out of the box. Try to think creatively. What can we do to hurt the Russians and to create more motivation among the West to pay, because that's at the end of the day what we're talking about, to pay and to send us more weapons so that we can win.
How can Jerusalem and Kiev collaborate already now to a greater extent?
It's a question of political will. Also, I think that the political will exist in Ukraine. I think it's less so in Israel. Again, because of what I said, Israel is fighting on 7 fronts. Right? Gaza, Judea and Samaria, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Yemen. We've got a lot on our plate, and Israel is trying to minimize the number of enemies, which I understand. It makes sense, right? So they're afraid, the Israeli government is afraid that by being too involved with Ukraine, the result will be that Russia is going to be helping its enemies more aggressively, right? Our enemies. I think that at this point, Russia does not have the bandwidth to help them more than that they're helping them now, much more. But again, these are, a lot of this information is classified. I don't have access to it. So it's speculation to a large extent. I think that it's important for Israel to help Ukraine as much as we can under the circumstances. And it's important to say to all our enemies, including Russia, that they must understand that attacking us comes with a price, and helping people who attack us also come with a price. And if you help our enemies, we're going to help yours. That's a language that they can understand. And at the very minimum, this is what should be said.
And do you think that this will happen anywhere soon, or it just depends on what's going on in Lebanon right now and in Gaza?
I think we need to finish the war. I think after this whole war is finished, then time will come. But I think beforehand, it's very difficult for me to see. I think it's probably, to a certain extent, it's a mistake. Huh? I'm not also defending in this 100% what's happening. I think we should find a way to, but again, I don't have access to all the information, and I understand where it's coming from, and it makes sense also to a certain extent. So,
Question I wanted to ask you, maybe like of a greater like geopolitical kind. Previously in our talk, you touched a little bit upon Russian imperialistic ambitions. What do you make of them, and why do you think that this is like a dangerous? Maybe in the West, not everyone understands that.
well, I tell you what, Putin years ago had a whole ceremony next to a statue of Catherine the Great. That great Russian Tsarin, that great Russian queen. And the message that he wanted to send is that Russia is back, and we're going to recreate the Russian Empire. Now, historically speaking, Russia has always been an imperialistic country. It's the largest, I think, in the history of the world, land-based empire. In other words, England was or France were larger, but they were spanning the entire globe. Whereas Soviet Union and the Russian Empire beforehand was one piece of land, if you want. It's huge, huge country, and that's part of their mentality. I don't know that they have to expand. Now we thought that the world has changed and that they would not go back to this time, but it was wrong. I didn't think that they would, renew the traditional Russian imperialism. I was wrong. I think everybody was wrong, almost everybody. I think former President Nixon had an interview in the early 90s after the fall of the Soviet Union where he said that's exactly what's going to happen. It's fascinating to watch this over 30 years afterward. But I think that at the end of the day, it has to do with their mentality, and this needs to change. And the only way for them to change is for them to pay enough of a price for them to say it's not worth it. It's not worth it. Who wants to do this? So that's why the West needs to be strong. Their imperialism needs to be checked, and they need to be told, you're a huge country, Russia, like without Ukraine, right? Russia without the Donbass or the Crimea, whatever. It's a huge country. They don't need all this. It's ridiculous. Well, so of course, Russian-speaking ethnic Russians living outside of Russia should be respected. Their human rights should be, of course, guaranteed, and their rights to speak Russian and all this. No worries about that. But Russia is big enough, and they don't need, and there's no legitimacy in the world to go and invade other countries. This is something very simple. They have to be told that, and they should be, told, and they should understand that if they're going to carry on the aggressive imperialistic policies, they will be destroyed. Their armies will be destroyed. They're gonna, and at the end of the day, if they lose, they understand. And that's also the way, at the end of the day, to create internal changes within Russia, because I don't think that there's some sort of genetic or even cultural reason which makes it impossible for Russians to be democratic. I think it's possible, but the Russian society has got a lot of problems, and for them to come back to being part of the civilized world, they need to understand that they have no choice, because if they're going to carry on with their policies, they're going to lose badly.
But some people in the West think that Putin would resort to nukes. Would you agree with that? Is
No.
that your impression?
No.
Why?
No, I think because that's something that could happen possibly in Iran, not in Russia. He's not some sort of a Shiite suicide terrorist. It's not. He's a thug. He's a mafioso at the end of the day. And yes, Russia has got a very large stockpile of nuclear weapons. Yes, they have missiles and submarines and planes and whatever. They have the ways, the means of using these weapons, but they understand what's going to be the price. Whatever, Europe, America, France and England have also nuclear weapons, and they also have the means to send them, and better means, more technologically advanced means of sending these weapons to St. Petersburg, to Moscow, to everywhere in Russia. And I think on top of that, Putin personally should be told that he will be killed. If he dares using anything like that, he personally will die together with his family, his friends, his entire regime. And there should be, I think, online, there should be a list of all the heads of the Putin regime with their personal addresses, because it's not so complicated to know where they live, and they should be made clear in public that all these people are going to die if they dare uh, uh, even thinking about using atomic nuclear weapons. All of these people will die. Them, their families, their friends, their regime, everything. And that's enough. They're not crazy to that extent.
Finally, probably one question for you. So we're talking a little bit about nuclear weapons. So we talked a little bit about the Israeli defense model. And just recently, President Zelenskyy, he went to Brussels and he made it clear that in order to establish peace in Ukraine, we have like basically two options, either NATO membership or nukes. What do you think about nukes in Ukraine? And is Israeli defense model at all possible without nukes?
I don't know. It's a good question. I think, yeah, Ukraine should be integrated into the European Union and into the NATO. The problem is that the rules are both of the NATO and of the EU is that you cannot adhere to these organizations if there is a territorial dispute with another country. So it's a problem. But ideally, Ukraine should, join these two organizations. In terms of having nukes, it's a bit of a problem because we would like to avoid having nuclear proliferation. Having more countries having nukes is not a good idea in principle. On the other hand, the Russians have deployed apparently tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. Maybe it would be a good idea to go and take them.
How?
Find a way.
By being creative?
Yeah, it's talking about the Israeli model. Being creative. Be creative. I don't know. Find a way. Go and take them. And then bring them back to Ukraine with a few launchers.
I think on this wonderful note, I'll say thank you. And I think it's something that we should consider indeed.